G'day guys, and welcome back to another One Piece deck profile. Today we're going to be looking at, I guess, the third out of the big three coming out of OP05, which is Purple Luffy, or Ploofy as it has been affectionately nicknamed. So for those of you who don't know what Luffy does, let's just take a closer look. So Luffy is a mono purple leader. 5,000 power, starts with 5 life. The effect is activate main once per turn. You can add the top card of your life to your hand. Then if you have 0 or 3 or more Don cards on the field, you can add 1 Don card from your Don deck and set it as active. So basically what that means is you can ramp a Don by taking a life on any turn except for your first turn. Whether you're going first or second, you can't do it. Then the 0 Don doesn't come up in this build because we're not running the secret rare Luffy in this build. So basically you can ramp a Don by taking a life, which is really good. So you can get to 10 Don really quickly in this deck. And there's a couple of cards in here that can slow down your opponent's Don curve as well, which just puts them miles behind. Now Luffy is a deck that doesn't really mind going first or second. I'll talk about some cards you definitely want to see in your opening hand to really get your ramp starting. And then there are a couple of key cards as well, which we'll focus on. The rest of the cards just kind of help protect, kind of help complement what the main strategy is of the deck, which is basically just ramping really fast, getting lots of bodies out, being nice and aggressive that way. Alright, first of all, let's talk about cards I want to see in opening hand. The first card I definitely want to see, regardless going first or second, is Miss Double Finger. If your opponent does put you on first, generally I'd say you want to choose to go second when using Ploofy. But if your opponent puts you on first, Miss Double Finger is the card you want to see in your hand. So she is a 2k counter, so is really good when you see her later on, but the main effect, the reason why we're running her in the deck, is on play you can trash a card from your hand, add 1 Don card from your Don deck and rest it. The trigger is you can do a -1 to play this card, so basically playing for free when it's triggered, but you want to see in the opening hand. So when it comes to your second turn, so if you're going first, you start with 3 Don, you use Luffy's effect to ramp to 4, you play Miss Double Finger and you go to 5 Don. So you're on 5 Don on your second turn. So your third turn, you're going to 7 Don, which opens you up to a world of options. So yeah, Miss Double Finger is a card I definitely want to see. The other card I want to see in my opening hand, if I'm going second, not going to be super helpful to us if we are going first, but going second, we don't mind seeing Miss All Sunday as a card. So it costs you 5,000 power on play. You can add 1 Don card from your Don deck and rest it. Then if you have 6 or more Don cards on your field, you can draw 1 card. So if we're going second, we start our second turn with 4 Don. We use Luffy's effect to ramp to 5. We play Miss All Sunday. We ramp to 6. And then we also get to draw a card, which is really nice. The trigger is you can Don -2 to play Miss All Sunday, but generally you want to see Miss All Sunday in your hand. Late game, it's actually quite nice to get a 5k body out for -hand a couple of Don, but otherwise, you want to see it for that ramping, that drawing fairly early on. So once we're hitting that 7-8 Don kind of thing on our third turn, we've got plenty of great options to help us in either helping us manage our Don a lot better or helping us control what our opponent's doing with their Don. So speaking of controlling what our opponents do, we are running 3 copies of Magellan. Magellan costs you 5, 6,000 body, no counter. On play, you Don -1. Your opponent returns 1 Don from their field to their Don deck. So you're putting your opponent behind 1 Don, which can be quite good going into certain matchups depending if you're going first or second. And in your opponent's turn, when this character is KO, your opponent returns 2 Don from their field to their Don deck. So generally people will leave Magellan alone for a while, which is nice. You can get a lot of free swings in there. It's only not really great when it comes to versing anything that can bottom deck or return to hand, because then you don't get that effect there. So blue is basically Magellan's not super great into blue in terms of that second part of the effect. It's still really good for that first part of the effect where you're messing up your opponent's curve by 1. The next card that's really great to see is Captain Kidd from OP05. So this one costs you 5, 6,000 power, has a counter of 1,000, is a blocker. The effect is your turn once per turn. When a Don card is returned to your Don deck, you can add 1 Don card from your Don deck and set it as active. So basically these Don minusing effects, which there's a fair few of them, like Magellan's one right there. There's a few others that we'll talk about in just a moment. It basically becomes a free effect, which is really nice. And then there's a 6k body, which is also a blocker, just hard for your opponent to deal with right there. Running full playset because the card is just fantastic. Next up, we are running a full playset of the starter deck kit from starter deck 10. So this costs you 7, 8,000 power on play and when attacking, Don -1, up to one of your leaders gains 1,000 power until the start of your next turn. So if we're thinking back to what we were talking about before with our Don curve, we are going first. We ramp to 4 on our second turn. We play Miss for Sunday. Sorry, we play Miss Double Finger. We go to 5. Our third turn, we are going to 7 Don. We can play the kid straight away out there, which is really nice. And then we're playing some Whitebeard shenanigans from there on. We're always going to be 6k, which is really nasty. And then if you have this kid out with the other kid, the effect becomes free, which is absolutely wild, going to 6k for no effort whatsoever. Next up, for some other great cards that we're running 2 copies of Paulie. So Paulie is here for some removal. Cost you 5, 6,000 body, no counter on play. You can rest 2 Don, add 1 Don card from your Don deck and set it as active. Then if you have 8 or more Don cards on the field, KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So when you have 7 Don, you can play Paulie, trigger the effect. Another form of ramp, which is also really nice, which means your next turn, you're going to 10 Don. So turn 4, you're at 10 Don, which is absolutely wild. That 4 cost or less is really relevant into this meta. Really good into Sakazuki. Sakazuki barely runs things over 4 cost. There's a few like your Borsalino and then the big secret rares that they may be running. Enel, yeah, you have a fair few that are at that threshold. They're Enel's main kind of late game strategy. You're not really going to touch with Paulie, but the early game stuff you can definitely deal with. The Ohm is really good into the Ohm because when that becomes a 6k body, Paulie is a great way to remove it quite easily. The other form of removal that we are running 4 copies of the Rush Cardo from starter deck 4. Cost you 9, 10,000 power on play. You Don -5 if you have that kit out. Technically only Don -4, which is really nice. Then you can KO one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 6 or less, and then this character gains Rush. So we're not touching the blue Borsalino in Sakazuki, not touching the Captain Kid starter deck in the mirror match, but otherwise we're hitting most things. Those big yellow bodies we're not going to be able to take out. That's probably the thing that Purple Luffy does struggle with the most, is the removal aspect. Basically what you're relying on for as your forms of removal is swinging into characters most of the time. But once Kaido is out, he's also hard to remove himself right there. So yeah, that rush aspect is really good for finishing games, controlling the board, killing something, swinging into something. So Kaido is, yeah, just a fantastic character to have. Now moving on to the rest of our 2k counters, we've already seen 4 of them in the Miss Double Finger. We are running 4 ultis from starter deck 4. Along with the ultis, we are running the page 1 that the ulti can play out for a Don -1 when we play ulti. Otherwise, great 2k counter. Page 1, great 1k counter vanilla that we can run there. The next 2k counter that we're running 2 copies of Extract from OP01. Cost you 5,000 body. On play, you can Don -1, your opponent trashes 1 card from their hand, so they choose 1 card to trash. They're great for that hand control. We do have another card that does help us with some hand control stuff, which we'll talk about later on. The last of the 2k counters that we're running 2 copies of Fanosuki. Did I say that right? I don't know. The Frankie, basically. So this one costs you 4,000 body. If you attach a Don, and if you have 8 or more Don cards on the field, gains Rush. Tell you I've won a few games playing the Frankie for Rush. Frankie for game. That's, yeah, really nice to have that in there. Otherwise, great 2k counter to play. Now, to quickly touch on the last vanilla that we have in the deck, we're running 2 copies of any 6 cost 8k vanilla. So in this case, you're running Fukarokuju. From OP01. OP05 has the Zoro Sanji one, which has the exact same stats, just basically any vanilla running in this slot right here. And for those of you who want to be extra defensive, because we do have a lot of cards in the deck that don't run counters, you can swap these out for another 2k counters. You can swap these out for another 2 blockers. We'll talk about blockers in just a moment, but I find running the vanilla quite handy. Just a nice cheap big body to get on board. Definitely becomes a bait for removal as well, so you can protect your other things. Otherwise, if it sticks on board, AK body's nice to just swing into things. Next up, we're going to have a look at our blockers. The first blocker that we're running is 2 copies of Law from starter deck 10. Law costs you 5,000 power, 1,000 counter. On play, you can Dom -1 if your opponent has 7 more cards in their hand, trash 2 cards from your opponent's hand. So this was one where you randomly choose the 2 cards. You don't get to see your opponent's hand, but you get to choose 2 cards for them. Whereas when it comes to X-Drake, your opponent chooses which card they trash. So a great way to control your opponent's hand. You got to run in the deck. It's just a great card for that. People will always try and play around it. If they don't, you get to punish them hard. The next blocker that we're running 2 copies of Uta from starter deck 5. Cost you 5,000 body, same stats there as the Law with the 1,000 counter. On block, you can Don -1. Rest one of your opponent's characters at the cost of 5 or less. So basically 2 blocks out of 1. Now I forgot to mention as well for the blocker Law, if you have the blocker Kid out on board, his effect becomes free, which is really nice. Sadly doesn't work for the Uta because the on block is on your opponent's turn, where the Kid only recovers your Don on your turn. The next blocker that we're running a full play set of Queen from starter deck 4. So Queen 5 cost, 6,000 body, 1,000 counter. On play, you can Don -1, becomes free again with the blocker Kid. You draw 2 cards, trash 1 card. So really good to help filter your hand that are dead cards. If you got a hand full of counterless cards, you can filter a little bit there. Otherwise, a 6k blocker is really nice to have. And counting the Kid blocker, we're running a total of 12 blockers in the deck. 12 blockers, 12 2k counters. So there's a lot of defense going on in the deck, despite it seeming like there's a lot of cards that don't have counter. Now, speaking of defense, we'll talk about the event cards that we're running. I mentioned we're running a fair few cards that don't have counter. This is where Gum Gum Jet Gatling comes in handy. Cost you 0, trash a card from your hand. Something gains 3,000 power during the battle. The trigger is you can ramp it on, which is really nice. You ramp it active, so it can help you with that early game ramp if it is hit early game for you. Otherwise, it's basically just there to chuck cards that are not going to be useful in your matchups, or if you've got a fairly dead hand, just helps you use your hand to protect yourself. The last card that we are running in the deck, we're running 3 copies of Blast Breath from starter deck 4. Cost you 1. You then also have to minus yourself a Dom. Your leader or one of your characters gains 4,000 power during the battle. So a nice 1 cost 4k buff, really handy to have. Alright, there is the deck in all of its glory. Let us know what you think of the profile. Let us know if you're rating Luffy up there in the top few decks, which, yeah, I definitely say it earns a spot up in the top few. Definitely not as consistent in terms of wins as when it comes to Enel and Sakazuki, but definitely a contender for the top 3, especially out of the new decks that we have access to. But thank you so much for checking out today's video. Stay beautiful, and we'll see you all in the next one.